Okay, well, it looks like you're getting ready to do a primary source analysis or a primary document analysis. So just a little bit of thoughts about that. I'll be doing these teachers' thoughts here and there just to give you some insight or some heads up or to talk to you about maybe a particularly difficult assignment. And you can listen to them or not. It's entirely up to you. They're just there for your aid. So if you need them, you can. If not, then don't. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk about, or today, whatever the case may be, about primary source or primary document analysis. So you've been given a primary source. This is a document that was written, or an item, a piece of art, or a letter, or something that was written in the time period that you're studying. That's what makes it a primary source. A secondary source is something that is written about a primary source or is giving you information. For example, a teacher's lecture or a textbook might talk about Columbus and give you all kinds of information about Columbus. So they're telling you about the time period, but a primary source is actually created or from the time period. So again, it can be a piece of art, it can be a document, it can be a legal document, it could be a legal testimony in court, for example, it could be a letter, it could be a variety of things. So don't get bogged down thinking it's always text-based, because it's not. It could be an image as well. All right, so now you know what the difference is between a primary and secondary source. And we kind of covered this during orientation, so I'm thinking that you might have an idea already. So I'm just going to move on then to creating and writing it. This is not an essay I'm asking you to do. This is an analysis. An analysis is objective. No editorializing, no bias. I do not want to know your opinion or your biases. I don't want them to show up as you're writing this. If you think someone's a sexist or you think someone is crazy because of their superstitious beliefs, whatever it is, it's all fine. I mean, you can think that, but I don't want to know that, because you're supposed to be remaining objective. You're supposed to be just strictly straight up looking at the evidence from the time period and basing your assumptions and inferences on what you understand about the historical context. Okay? So these are pretty much set up for you almost in a template format. I've given you the introduction that I've given you your first paragraph. The introduction that I've given you in the instructions, I just want you to copy and paste that. If I've made it blue or red or some color just so it stands out, please just turn it to black, regular font, make that your first paragraph. Sometimes I'll fill it in with the author and the name of the primary source. Sometimes you have to add that. So depending on what instructions I've given you, if I've already given you the author and the title of the primary source in the introduction, you're good to go. You'd know if I didn't, because I put little brackets and I'd say insert author here, things like that. Okay? So you just copy and paste that. First paragraph done. Then you're just going to go through the questions in the introduction. So almost always the next paragraph is going to start the historical context is. Because remember, when you get through with this, you should be able to hand this to your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, or your boyfriend, your girlfriend, husband, wife, doesn't matter. And they wouldn't have to know anything about what's happening in the historical time period. Nothing. They will get everything they need to be able to understand that primary source from the analysis. So look at it that way. So you're going to give it to your sister or your friend, and so you're going to have to give them a little bit of information about what's going on in the historical time period. You know, if we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, let's say that was your primary source, then you'd want to kind of lay out the events that kind of led up to the Revolutionary War. You want to give some kind of backstory. Now, you don't want to write a book, but you just want to give them enough so when you're talking about your source, they'll understand how it fits in, because the whole focus here is this primary source. That's what this analysis is about. So you're going to say, well, this is the historical context. This is what was happening at the time this was created or this was written. And so you set it up that way. You're going to pull quotes. If you're using a document or text-based source, you're going to pull quotes from it into the historical context section, and you're going to say, the author stated this, this indicates blah, blah, blah. So you're tying the document or the source in with the time period, the historical time period. Now it would be different if you were using an image. Then you're not going to have direct quotes, but you're going to have to convey some type of, maybe the image has things written on it, or maybe it's trying to convey a message. But if we were going to do a analysis on a image, I would probably do another one of these. Just for now, let's just stick with the text base. Excuse me. So the very next thing after your historical context is you're going to put in the author. The author is, I've given you all the leads ins. They should be in different colors so you'll know, okay, your next paragraph, I want you to start out with those exact same words. The author is, bias is, every author has a bias. Everybody that writes something has a bias. We all have a bias. We walk through our lives with biases. I'm quite a bit older than you probably, so I view things in the world probably completely different than you do because I look at things differently than you do. A bias is simply the lens through which you view the world. There's lots of things that go into that. My cat's scratching at the door. Excuse me for a second, because he will not let up. Dog, freak, ruining my taping. Sorry. Okay. Focus. All right. So what was I talking about? The author's bias. Everyone has a bias. It is just how we move through the world. There are gender biases. There are religious biases. There are political biases. There are age biases. There are class biases. Heck, you have biases. You can take people that just like all different kinds of music. And if you were asking them to evaluate something that had something to do with a band or whatever, their bias, whatever their perspective was about music, is going to kind of infiltrate into their perspectives. So those are the kind of clues that you're looking for in a source. So you're going to know the historical context, and then you have this author. Now, sometimes you're going to know the author, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're not going to have any information about an author. You might have a name, not know who the heck they are. Or you might not even have a name. Does that mean that you don't have to do the bias? No, you still have to do the bias. So you can make some inferences. If you don't have an author, you can say, okay, was the author male or female? Depending on the time period, that might be a real easy question to answer. Was a person educated? You can tell by the way they're writing. Are they educated or no? If they are, that might indicate some class that they're from. So you can immediately figure out, oh, it's male and they're from this class. And you don't even have to know who they are. All right? So bias is when I ask you for the author's bias, you're going to use the time period, any clues you can pull from the primary source itself to identify the bias. But again, always think gender, class, education, political perspective, religious perspective, all those things color people's views of the world as they're looking out in their time period. So just think about that, okay? And then the author's intent. Every author has an intent when they write something, and they also have an audience that they're thinking about. If I was going to write a paper on abortion, and let's say I was going to write it to my audience is a very Catholic, conservative audience, I might choose to word things in a particular way, or I might have a certain perspective because I know that this is the audience I've chosen to write to. If I was going to write a story on, making cookies. So maybe I would think that my audience would be people that like to cook, or maybe stay-at-home moms that have little kids. Every author, no matter what it is, no matter how complex or how mundane, have an audience in mind. Who is this person's audience? Who do you think? Now, do we know for sure? Can we say absolutely positively this was that person's bias? No. This was that person's intent? No. I don't have the answer. I'm asking you to put on your critical thinking hats, and you say, okay, well, this is the evidence. This is my support. This is the information I have that you've given me. And from that information, this is what I'm pulling. Everybody in the class can have a different idea, and that's completely fine with me, as long as you can support it. You must use the unit material. You cannot go outside. You cannot Google stuff outside of the unit, because that will get you in a lot of trouble. So please don't use outside sources unless I've specifically stated you can. And I really rarely do that, if at all, on analysis. So you are bound by the unit material. Okay, so another thing I've asked you is the storyline. Brief overview. If your brother or your sister's reading this, they've never read the document or the source that you're using, so just give them a little heads up. Okay, this is what it's about. Short and sweet. This is analysis. There's no room for elaborating, going on and on. No need for flowery language. Make this very direct and to the point. It's an analysis. And you're the historian, and you are looking at the evidence, and you're making these judgments. Okay, so then after the storylines and the bias and the intent and the author and the historical context, you're always going to get to the last couple questions, and those are the ones that will change depending on the document, depending on the source, if it's a document or something else, and also depending on the time period and what we're doing. So those questions will change. But you'll see in the instructions that the lead-ins will all be provided for you, and they'll usually be provided in a different color, so you know exactly, okay, this is how I have to begin that. Now, if you want to say that the author's bias conveys, or the author's bias is, gosh, I'm sorry. I don't care if it's exactly, but I want the historical context. You can say the historical context reveals, the historical context is. But the first two words, historical context, the reason is when I grade these, the first thing I do is I go through. 1, do they have the introduction that I've said? 2, do they have all the lead-ins? 3, have they supported it with evidence from the unit material? Have they provided footnotes from the unit material? Have they given me the proper amount of footnotes? I've given you instructions on how many direct quotes from the primary source you need to have, and how many references or paraphrases you have to have from the secondary sources. Those are things I look at before I even start reading. So make sure you have all those. And the first one is always a little bit more difficult, but as we go through the semester and you do more and more of these, pretty soon you'll be knocking these out like it's nothing. So just push through the first one. I'll give you feedback. After that, as you move forward, I'll get you feedback if you need it. But most people are getting A's on these by the end of the semester. I assume it'll be the same with this class. Okay? So I hope I haven't dragged this out for too long. I hope that you found this useful. And I will not, drown you in these. Okay. Well, it's evening time here, so I'm going to wish you a good night and good luck. I can't wait to read your paper.